I reckon a man knows when his time's come. And standing there on that cracked wooden crate, a noose biting the back of my neck while Ash Hollow burned behind me, I figured mine had finally caught up. The heat from the flames licked my spine like a warning from hell itself. Everything smelled of smoke, fear, and old sins coming home to roost. The townsfolk gathered in a tight half circle, their faces glowing orange in the firelight, eyes hollow as dug-up graves. Nobody spoke. Nobody had to. Their silence was a verdict all its own. A gust of wind slipped through the alleyways, carrying ash past my boots and making the gallows beam creak above me. The church bell rang on its own. No preacher, no ropes, just the night itself calling out like it wanted to witness my last breath. And then I saw him, the sheriff. Reed Calder stood a few feet away, boots planted in the dust, watching me with that cold, carved calm he wore like a second skin. For a heartbeat, the crowd felt miles away. It was just me, the rope, and Reed's steady, merciless stare. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, and rested his boot against the crate beneath my feet. Not kicking it yet, just letting me know he would, and that he'd enjoy the silence that followed. Someone in the crowd lifted a match, struck it slow, held it over the rope like they were lighting a prayer. The flame caught quick. Rope always remembers the taste of fire. I felt the heat crawl up toward my jaw, felt the smoke sting my eyes. Sweat slid down my temples, but I kept myself steady. Would have been easier to tremble, but dying ain't something you want happening sloppy. A woman gasped. A child cried once, then was hushed. The fire rising behind me painted the sky red, the kind of red that don't mean sunset, but endings. Ash Hollow was falling apart, and somehow the town figured hanging me would keep the pieces from drifting too far. Funny thing is, a man sees his whole life in moments like that. Every mistake, every wrong turn, every face he failed to forget. And Lord knows I had enough of those to fill a graveyard. I took a slow breath. Smoke burned my throat, but I swallowed it anyway. "If I'm going to hang," I said, loud enough to cut through the crackling fire. "You're damn well gonna know why." A few folks stepped back. Others leaned closer. Even the flames seemed to settle like they knew a confession was coming. I looked past the crowd, past the burning saloon, and straight into the heart of this cursed place. "That rope ain't the beginning," I said. "It ain't even the end." The fire touched the knot above me, and smoke curled around my cheek like a whisper. This started a long time before tonight. Started with a boy, a storm, and a bullet I never should have fired. The bell rang again. The rope groaned. And as the flames crawled closer to my throat, I began telling them the truth of how Ash Hollow turned to fire, and how I ended up on that dying crate, waiting for the drop. Funny thing about the past, it don't stay buried. Not out here, not in the West. The desert's too empty, the night's too long, and a man's thoughts too damn loud. Before Ash Hollow, before the smoke and the gallows, I wore a badge, wore it proud, too. Thought it made me one of the good ones. Thought it put me on the righteous side of a world that didn't offer many clean lines. Truth is, that badge was heavier than any noose. It happened on a night the sky cracked open like a shotgun blast. Lightning tore across the clouds, and thunder rolled over the rooftops of White Mesa, the town I was trying to protect, or maybe trying to impress. Hard to tell the difference anymore. The freight office had been hit. Doors busted open. Safe blown apart. Footprints running out into the storm. I followed them, boots soaking in the mud, my coat whipping like a wounded flag behind me. The rain stung my eyes, but I kept going, heart pounding like a war drum in my chest. Then I saw him, a figure running ahead, clutching a rifle tight against the storm. I yelled once. He didn't stop. I yelled again. Still nothing but the wind answering back. So I did what the badge told me to do. what every lawman back then thought was the right thing. I raised my gun, hands cold, breath shaking, lightning flashed, and I fired. The figure stumbled, dropped the rifle, and fell face first into the mud. For a moment I felt relief. Fool that I was. Then the lightning came again, bright as judgment, bright enough to strip the shadows clean. That's when I saw his face. Not a bandit, not a killer, just a boy. 16 at most. Rain washing the dirt from his cheeks, leaving nothing but freckles and fear. His lips moved like he wanted to apologize, or maybe forgive. I'll never know, because the next rumble of thunder stole whatever words he tried to say. The town called me a hero the next morning, said I'd protected their silver, their pride, their peace. They bought me drinks, slapped my back, told me the boy had no business out there anyway. But I couldn't drink the praise down, couldn't swallow it without feeling the bullet lodged somewhere inside me. I turned in my star that same day, dropped it on the sheriff's desk without a word. He asked what happened. Justice, I said, but what I meant was murder. I packed my saddle, rode out before sunrise, and didn't stop riding until my horse was trembling. And from that day on, one name followed me like a ghost carved into my bones. Eli Harrow. A boy who should have lived. A boy who died with my bullet in him. Some folks say time heals things. Those folks have never killed a child. There's places in this world a man ain't meant to find. Places that stay off maps for a reason. Like a wound the land don't want touched. Ash Hollow was one of those places. I found it at the tail end of a long ride, the sun bleeding low over the horizon, dust rising off the trail like smoke from a dying fire. My horse was tired, and so was I. Both of us carried more miles than sense. The valley opened up sudden, like the earth had been split by an old axe. Down in that cut sat a town, if you could call it that. Just a scatter of crooked buildings stitched together by wind and stubbornness. Wasn't on any map I'd ever seen, and I'd ridden enough country to know that meant trouble. Ash Hollow smelled like iron, and the promise of rain that never came. A dry kind of death lingered in the air, the kind you taste before you see it. The first building that caught my eye was a small, leaning saloon with a roof that sagged like an old man's back. Across from it stood a chapel with peeling white paint and windows stained by dust instead of prayer. Off to the side stood a gallows, new timber, new rope. Too new for a place this worn. That was my first warning. The second was the people. They stopped whatever they were doing the moment my horse's hooves hit the main road. Women froze on porches. Men stiffened at the hitching rails. Eyes followed me. Quiet, heavy, measuring. Folks in the frontier can smell a stranger quicker than a wolf smells blood. But this crowd, they weren't curious. They were afraid. Afraid of me or afraid for me. Hard to tell which. I rode slow, tried not to stir the dust too much. The whole place felt brittle, like one wrong move might make it fall apart. As I passed the chapel, I saw someone sitting on the steps. A preacher, or what was left of one. Tall man, thin as winter, suit frayed, hat tilted low. His eyes followed me, and there was nothing holy in them. Just a tired knowing, like he'd seen every sin a man could make, and was waiting on me to add to the pile. Above him hung a wooden sign, half rotten, swaying in the wind. No trouble, no questions. 2 rules. Simple enough. But the way they were carved, deep, angry cuts, it sounded less like a warning and more like a plea. Another gust rolled through the street, pushing dust across my boots, whispering something I didn't want to hear. That whisper was the third warning. By rights, I should have turned my horse around, kept riding, left Ash Hollow to its ghosts and its secrets. But I was tired, hungry, and maybe part of me thought a place this broken might understand a man like me. So I ignored the warnings ignored the feeling in my gut, ignored the way every window shutter twitched as I passed. I tied my horse to the hitch outside the saloon. The boards creaked under my weight. I pushed the door open, and the warm, stale air hit my face like a hand. That's when I knew I should have kept riding, but it was already too damn late. The saloon door swung shut behind me with a tired thud, the kind that tells you the place has seen too many nights and too many sins. Warm whiskey air wrapped around me, thick enough to chew, and the piano in the corner played a tune that sounded half alive, half dying. That's when I saw her, Mercy Lane, standing by the bar like she'd been carved out of smoke and regret, red hair tied loose, eyes sharp enough to cut a man clean open. She wasn't singing yet, but her voice was already in the room somehow, hanging in the haze like a secret folks were afraid to breathe. She looked my way. Not long. Just long enough to read me like a wanted poster. "You've killed before," she said, low, steady. "Can tell by how you hold your glass." I hadn't even ordered one yet. But damn if she wasn't right. I tried to answer, but before I could, the piano stumbled into silence, and the whole room shifted like cattle sensing a storm. Boot steps, clean, slow, too sure of themselves. Then he walked in, Sheriff Reed Calder, boots polished like he'd never stepped in mud a day in his life. Smile bright enough to blind a man who didn't know better. Eyes cold, cold enough to make the whiskey turn to ice in your gut. He didn't look at the room. He claimed it. "Evening, folks," he said, voice warm enough to feel wrong. "Hope we're all remembering how to behave." The crowd let out this nervous laugh, the kind that dies before it reaches the walls. Reed's eyes landed on me next. "Well now, fresh face?" He stepped closer, grin widening. A drifter with a steady hand is always useful. Useful. Not welcome, not trusted, useful. That chill crawled down my spine again. I nodded, polite enough to keep the peace, but something tightened in my chest. A warning, maybe a memory, maybe both. The room resumed breathing then, slow and uneasy. Mercy stepped toward me, glass in hand, her reflection flickering in the mirror behind the bar. She leaned in just enough for her voice to be mine alone. "You're already sinking, cowboy." She didn't smile, didn't blink, and I believed her, because in Ash Hollow that night, with the sheriff smiling like the devil at a dance, and Mercy Lane staring straight through the dirt on my soul, I felt it too, felt the ground shifting under my boots, and I hadn't even had a drink yet. Takes a while for a man to see a town for what it truly is, but once the dust settles in your eyes just right, the truth shines through like a knife catching sunlight. Ash Hollow wasn't just quiet, it was wrong. The first thing I noticed were the ranches at the edge of town, or what was left of them. Black skeletons of old homesteads, charred fences, a child's swing still hanging from a dead beam, swaying even when the wind didn't blow. Family went east, folks said. Too quickly, too neatly, like a lie rehearsed so many times they forgot what the truth sounded like. Then came the second warning. Sheriff Reed called me to his office, a place that smelled like polish and rot at the same time. He stood by his desk with a stack of papers in his hand, smiling that smile of his, the kind that never reached his eyes. "Land deeds," he said proudly. "People get scared. They sell cheap. I'm just saving Ash Hollow from chaos." Chaos. That's what he called a burned-out ranch with the family, gone east overnight. Chaos. That's what he said he needed me to help control. He offered me work like it was a gift from heaven. "Ride with my men," he said. "Keep order, keep the peace. And if the wrong house catches fire, well, accidents happen." He looked at me then, real slow, waiting to see if I'd swallow the poison he was serving. I didn't answer. Couldn't. not with the memory of Eli Harrow's blood still buried somewhere under my ribs. That night, Mercy found me sitting alone in the saloon, staring at a glass I hadn't touched. "You saw the deeds," she said. Wasn't a question. I nodded, and she motioned me to follow her. We went up the narrow stairwell behind the bar, the air thick with cigar smoke and secrets that didn't belong to daylight. Inside her room, she lit a single lantern, not for warmth, but because truth needs shadows to soften the blow. "Look," she whispered. She pointed to the vanity mirror, or rather, to the wood beneath it. Names, dozens of them, carved deep, rough, desperate. Some crossed out, some half faded, all gone. "These were the folks who stood up to him," Mercy said. "One by one, they disappeared. My breath caught when I reached the last name. The letters were cut with a trembling hand, smaller, almost hesitant. Eli Harrow." The lantern flickered. My heart didn't. For a moment I couldn't move, couldn't think. That boy's face from the storm, the mud, the lightning, came roaring back. I closed my eyes and wished the memory didn't feel so fresh, so alive, so damn accusing. Mercy stepped closer, voice soft but sharp enough to split bone. "You know him, don't you?" I swallowed hard. "Yeah." The word felt like swallowing glass. Little by little, the shape of Ash Hollow began to twist into something familiar, like an old nightmare wearing a new coat. My past and this town's sins were starting to braid together, tighter and tighter, just like a rope. And out here in the West, a rope only ever means one thing. Midnight in Ash Hollow feels different, like the dark itself is holding its breath. That's why when the chapel bell rang, sharp and lonely, every soul in town froze where they stood. Folks whispered the same thing. That bell only rings when someone's about to die. Reed didn't waste a second. "Check it out," he ordered, like death was just another chore he could send men to sweep up. We pushed through the chapel doors. Cold air hit me first, then the smell, iron, sweat, and something like fear dried into the walls. The lantern light fell on the altar, and my stomach tightened. The preacher was there, tied up, beaten so badly his own shadow seemed to flinch away from him. Above his head, nailed crooked into the wood, was a land deed, blood dripping off the corners. Reed clicked his tongue and shook his head. "Bandits," he said, always too quick with an answer, too calm. Mercy slipped beside me later, voice barely a whisper. "The preacher tried to sell the town's secrets to the railroad. Reed found out." I looked back at that altar, at the blood drying on holy wood, at the bell still swaying even though the wind had died. And right then, with the pew silent and the truth hanging heavier than any sermon, I knew for sure the devil in Ash Hollow wasn't hiding. He was wearing a badge and smiling. Reed called it a small job, and the way he smiled when he said it should have told me everything. But in Ash Hollow, warnings come dressed in polite words. He took me and 5 of his men out past the ravine, where the rocks rise like old teeth. The men tied bandit scarves over their faces, crimson cloth meant to fool anyone who lived long enough to talk. "The gold train's coming through," Reed said, adjusting his reins. "Make it look real, make it look messy." Messy. That word stayed stuck in my head, like a splinter. We crouched behind the boulders as the ground began to tremble. Metal screamed in the distance, echoing down the canyon walls. Then the engine burst into view, a black beast thundering through the dust. "Now," Reed barked. Hell opened. Gunfire tore the quiet apart. Sparks lit the dry grass. Men screamed, horses panicked, bullets cracked against steel and stone. I hesitated. Just a breath. But a breath is enough to choose a side, and I chose wrong. I pulled the trigger, watched a guard fall from the top car. Watched his body hit the rocks and disappear into the smoke. The whole world stank of burning metal and grass turning to ash. A fire crawled across the hillside, hungry and alive. When it was over, the train lay bleeding steam, the survivors moaning under the wreckage. Reed rode through the smoke like a man surveying his garden. He tossed me a small leather pouch. Gold inside. "You're one of us now," he said softly. "No clean way back." His voice felt like a lock clicking shut. On the ride home, the night settled cold around us. The others joked, laughed, passed a flask like they'd just won a prize at a fair. But then we passed it. A wagon at the top of the hill, burned black, still smoking. And on the side of the wood, half melted into the char, I saw a seal, the railroad seal, not a bandit's mark, not a family's brand. Railroad, official, stamped, claimed. My grip tightened on the reins. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't even crime. It was business. Business written in corpses and signed with the flames behind us. Mercy didn't ask to talk. She just grabbed my coat and pulled me behind the saloon, eyes bright with something fierce, something wounded. The moon barely touched us back there. Maybe it didn't want to see what came next. She opened her hand, and inside was a small silver locket. Old, scratched, handled too many times. It clicked open with a tired sigh. A boy's face stared back at me. Young, hopeful, freckles catching the lantern light. Eli Harrow. For a moment my lungs just stopped. The storm, the mud, the shot I fired, all of it came crashing back like a wave too cold to survive. "He was my brother," Mercy said, voice trembling but hard beneath it. "Reed found him out there that night, half buried in the mud, barely breathing. Said he was lucky he got to him first, patched him up just enough to keep him useful." I felt the ground tilt under me. She kept going, didn't blink. "Reed forced him into raids, said he was giving him purpose. But Eli started asking questions Reed didn't like." Her jaw tightened, and then he vanished. The air between us grew thin, sharp. "You knew him," she whispered. "I shot him." The words cracked coming out of me. "I thought he died that night. I never stopped hearing that breath he took at the end, the one he didn't finish." Mercy closed the locket and pressed it to her chest like it hurt to hold. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Two broken souls, standing in the dark, staring at the same ghost. Then something inside her fire snapped, and something inside mine answered. We didn't plan it, didn't talk, didn't even think. We just grabbed onto each other like drowning souls trying to stay above the water, trying to breathe in a town that stole breath for sport. It wasn't tender, it wasn't clean, it was grief, fury, guilt, all tangled up in shaking hands and whispered names we were both trying to forget. For a few stolen hours, the world outside disappeared. Ash Hollow, Reed Calder, Eli's shadow, the screams buried under this cursed dirt. Everything faded. And for a heartbeat, just one, the weight we carried finally slipped off our shoulders. But dawn comes cruel in the west. When the first light crawled over the rooftops, the spell broke. Mercy looked out toward the empty street, eyes shining with something that wasn't hope. "Reed's not done," she said softly, and I knew she was right, 'cause whatever we'd found in that dark corner behind the saloon, it wasn't salvation, it was a pact. Reed Calder's story ends with us, or we burn with the rest of Ash Hollow. Bad news travels fast in the west, but in Ash Hollow it moved like wildfire with a tailwind. By sunrise, everyone knew about the ambush in the ravine. They knew about the train, the bodies, the gold gone missing. They didn't know the truth, but truth don't stand a chance against fear. Someone talked, maybe a deputy, maybe a drunk, Maybe Reed whispered it himself just to watch the spark turn into a blaze. It didn't matter. Reed didn't care who the traitor was. He didn't want the right man. He wanted the useful one. And in a town built on lies, a stranger makes the perfect sacrifice. By mid-morning, my face was plastered on every crooked wall, every saloon post, every shutter that barely clung to its hinges. Wanted murder, arson, train robbery, even corrupting the peace, whatever the hell that meant. I stared at my own eyes, drawn in charcoal, dead-looking, even on paper. Reed told the folks I was a railroad spy, said I rode in to steal their land, their gold, their future, their children's future. Same kind of lies I'd heard in other towns, lies I once helped spread when I was foolish enough to believe a badge meant truth. Fear does the rest. People looked at me different now, stepped off the boardwalk, pulled their kids close, whispered, "That's him," under their breath like I was a ghost walking in daylight. Then came the worst sight of all, the gallows, new beams, fresh rope, standing tall and proud in the square like it had been waiting on me since the day my boots touched this cursed dirt. Mercy found me staring at it. Her eyes were wide, rimmed red, voice breaking even though she tried to hold it steady. "Run," she whispered. "Please, just ride out. Don't look back." I wanted to. God knows I wanted to. But I remembered Eli Harrow's name carved under her mirror. I remembered the preacher on the altar, the burned ranches, the families gone east, and the smell of smoke that never left this place. "If I run," I said slowly, "he'll just hang someone else." Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head, like she already knew the ending. I touched her cheek, just once, before the deputies grabbed me from behind. They dragged me through the dusty street as the crowd gathered, men gripping their rifles, women clutching their shawls, faces lit with something between terror and hunger. Reed stood by the gallows, smiling that polished smile of his. "Told y'all," he shouted, "justice always finds its man." Justice, if only the dead could hear how that word gets twisted. They shoved me up onto the crate. The rope swung above me, swaying like it knew my name. And that's how I ended up where this whole tale began. A noose around my neck, a crowd around my feet, and Ash Hollow waiting to see if the stranger would swing. Afternoon settled over Ash Hollow like a curtain pulled by a cruel hand. Thick, heavy, final. We were back where everything began. Reed stood a few feet away, boots polished, coat spotless, smile carved into his face like a brand he was proud of. He lifted his arms, preaching about justice, about order, and about protecting Ash Hollow from evil. But behind him, behind those honeyed lies, his men moved quiet. They soaked the saloon in kerosene, doors, windows, the very bones of the place. Burned the records, burned the witnesses, burned the truth. Mercy was somewhere in the crowd. I couldn't see her at first, just felt her eyes on me, wet, shaking, burning with something fierce. My legs trembled on the crate, not from fear, but from anger, from the weight of everything that led me to that rope. Reed stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the cologne he used to hide the scent of smoke on his soul. "This town will sleep safe tonight," he shouted. Then he kicked the crate. The world dropped out from under me. The rope snapped tight around my throat. I heard someone scream, maybe Mercy, maybe me. And then, lightning split the sky. A white-hot flash tore across the clouds, and at that same breath of a moment, the saloon erupted. A fireball punched into the night, roaring upward like the devil himself had clawed out of the floorboards. The blast hit the gallows hard, the beam cracked, splintered, and the rope above me caught fire instead of my neck. Something gave way. I dropped, hitting the dirt so hard my vision went black around the edges. I coughed and sucked in air, half choking, half alive, the taste of smoke clawing down my throat. The crowd erupted in chaos. People screamed, ran, shoved. The chapel bell began tolling wildly, ringing like it wanted heaven to look down and see the mess we'd made. Through the smoke and fire she came, Mercy, moving like a ghost set free. She reached me before anyone else could, crouched low, blade flashing once in the firelight, slicing the burning rope from my shoulders. Her hands shook as she pulled me close. "Get up," she whispered, voice ripped raw. "Please, get up." I staggered to my feet, ears ringing, knees threatening to give. She pressed something into my hand, a revolver, loaded, warm from her grip. "And this," she breathed. Her eyes met mine, full of fear, fury, and something that looked a lot like the last hope Ash Hollow had left. And with the sky still burning behind us, and the sheriff's lies collapsing beam by beam, I knew exactly who that gun was meant for. Reed Calder had written the fate of this town in fire. Now it was my turn to finish the chapter and carve the ending in smoke. Gunfire cracked through the night like thunder gone mad, echoing off rooftops, shattering windows, turning Ash Hollow into something wild and feral. Townsfolk scattered in every direction, some firing at me, some at Reed's men, most not sure who the devil they were shooting at. The chapel bell rang again, louder, angrier, as if the church itself wanted to scream. The whole damn town had become a battlefield of shadows and flame. Through the smoke, Reed moved with a kind of cold grace that didn't belong to a living man. Fast, precise, every shot deliberate. I saw him drop 2 men aiming at me, not to save me, but because no one touched what Reed believed belonged under his boot. We met in the middle of the street. The flames lit the dust between us, glowing red like the earth itself wanted blood. Both of us half burned, half crazy, but too stubborn to die before the other man fell. Reed raised his gun first. He was quicker, always had been. His first bullet grazed my ribs, fire ripping across my side. The second tore through my shoulder and spun me damn near off my feet. Pain shot up my arm so sharp it felt like someone had poured molten iron into my bones. Every time I lined up a shot, he stepped aside, smooth, practiced, like he'd danced this same deadly waltz a dozen times before. I staggered. My knees buckled once, twice, but I forced myself upright. Reed kept coming, slow, certain, gun steady under the flicker of burning rooftops. His smile didn't break, not once. He talked as he walked, about Eli, about mercy, about how men like me always cracked when the world pushed hard enough. His words cut, but not as deep as the bullet wounds. Blood dripped from my fingers. My grip slipped on the revolver. My vision blurred around the edges, yet I held my ground. When we fired, it wasn't clean, it wasn't elegant. It was rage and pain and stubbornness blasting out in the same heartbeat. Reed's bullet hit me again, white-hot agony tearing through my side. My own bullet struck his chest. Not the kill I aimed for, but enough to shake him, enough to change the fight. He staggered backward, tried to lift his gun one more time, and for a split second, with the fire roaring behind him, I believed he might actually do it. Reed Calder was the only man I ever saw who could make death wait its turn, but his legs finally gave out. He dropped to his knees, still wearing that carved, impossible smile, like his body hadn't yet told him he was gone. Behind us, the sheriff's office collapsed into the flames. It burned with his secrets, his power, and his name. Then I heard it, a scream, Mercy's. She fell near the chapel steps, hit by a stray bullet. I stumbled through the smoke, every movement a knife turning inside me, until I reached her. Stained glass above us melted from the heat. falling in soft, glowing shards around her like dying stars. I gathered her in my arms, her breath faint, her blood warm on my hands, and as the fire finally choked itself out, as the last echoes of gunfire faded, Ash Hollow went still, dead still, for the first time in years. You could hear that town take a real honest breath, and it sounded a whole lot like morning. Morning came gray and slow, like the sky was ashamed of what it had seen. Ash Hollow lay half ruined, half alive, a town caught between what it was and what it lost. The gallows was nothing but blackened timber, and Reed's badge lay twisted in the mud, cold as the man who wore it. I carried Mercy up the hill overlooking the tracks, laid her beside the preacher, two souls who deserved better than this cursed dirt. I carved Eli Harrow's name into a stone, even if all I ever found of him was a locket and the weight of his ghost in my chest. My gun went at the foot of the graves, last piece of the man I used to be. The sky darkened, heavy, waiting. I saddled my horse and rode out slow. The first drops tapped my hat brim, then more, until the rain came hard enough to swallow the road behind me. Ash Hollow blurred into a curtain of water. The tracks of my horse melted into mud before I'd gone 50 yards. I didn't look back, not once. Whatever justice we bought here was paid in blood and fire. The rain could have the rest. Some places don't need a witness, just a man willing to ride away and never return.